Aloha, and welcome to another episode of Groundswell Origins Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. Today, I have the legend, Paco Underhill, who's considered the retail Sherlock Holmes or retail anthropologist, founder who really kind of created a new science around looking at humans in retail environments and how they interact and how businesses can make changes to actually improve their business. And he's written Why We Buy, What Women Want, How We Eat, and The Call of Them all New York Times best-selling author, talking about all these insights across the spectrum of different ways that people buy in these environments. And we really honed in a little bit on his new book, which is really about grocery stores and sort of the changing buyer behavior around food and containers and sustainable eating and so forth. And we touch on a little bit of his work in terms of this retail anthropology as well. It's a great episode. He's a legend. I'm so happy to have him on the show, and let's just paddle in. Thank you for joining the show, Paco Underhill. Welcome.
Hey, it's nice to be with some of my Canadian friends.
Forgot the A at the end.
So I'm part Canadian.
Are you really?
Yeah, I am. Part of my family comes from Windsor.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't catch that in your Wikipedia. I didn't catch that. So I did catch one thing that was interesting that we might share is that your dad was stationed in the Philippines, and I actually grew up in the Philippines for a few years.
My father was a diplomat, and I spent much of my childhood in Southeast Asia.
Did you spend much time in the Philippines then?
I spent time in the Philippines in the late 1960s, and I have worked for PANA, the Philippine advertising agency. So I have commuted to the Philippines over the past, 35 years.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Yeah. So I thought that would be interesting. It was like, I actually spent a lot of time as a kid, and I have a deep affinity for Southeast Asia. I love that culture and the food.
Chuck up bahasa. How's your Tagalog, or how's your Malay?
No Tagalog except for Mayo Dion, and I know what balut is.
Well, I've been working for Carnival Cruise Line, evaluating the design of points of service on new cruise ships, and they were very surprised when I got on board, because over the course of a day, I would speak English, French, Polish, Tagalog, and Malay with members of the crew. And they would tell me stuff that they would never tell their bosses. And my client had no idea that I had those language skills.
How many languages do you speak?
None particularly well.
But enough to be able to get by. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but definitely not Tagalog. Yeah. Well, beautiful. Well, let's take a step back. Give us the audience a little bit of a background on your journey. You've written maybe more books. Is it 4 books, or how many books have you written?
Well, I've written 4 books solely under my name.
Right.
But I've done multiple books with other people.
Yeah, I've seen you do a lot of forwards and stuff, so I wasn't sure how to frame that. And the body of work, as I understand it, is you're kind of the grandfather of retail anthropology, or they call you the retail Sherlock Holmes, or the different names. Give us a little bit of how you came upon this, and what's your background been for how long you spanned your career.
Well, more than 40 years ago, I was a poor part-time instructor in a doctoral program in environmental psychology, or the effect that space has on people's behavior. I was also part, at the same time, of the crew that would go to different cities across the U.S., look at topography and traffic patterns, and rewrite commercial zoning ordinances. Now, what you can't tell looking at me is I'm 6'5". I'm tall. But I had my moment of personal epiphany on the roof of the Seafirst Bank building in Seattle. 60 stories up, I was on the edge of the roof installing the movie cameras to look at the traffic patterns on the streets below, and there was a stiff wind blowing, and I could feel the building rocking in the breeze. I tell a joke that I'm one of the only tall people I know that get height sick with 2 pairs of socks on. But on the roof of that building, with that building rocking in the breeze, I promised myself as I rode down the elevator that I would reinvent my profession. A week later, I was standing in a bank in New York City, in line, getting madder by the moment, and realized that I could adapt the same tools that I'd been using to look at how a city worked, to start looking at how a bank or a store or an airport or a museum or a hospital or a doctor's office worked. And I'd never have to go to the roof of the building again. I'd never worked in retail, never taken a marketing course, never taken a business course, but I started knocking on doors. And part of what was really exciting here is that given the skill set and the experience that I had looking at cities and focusing them on smaller, compact spaces, I could go in and be able to come back to my client and go, here are 5 things that we could do tomorrow. And the fact that they could hire somebody to come in and give them immediate tactical advice. And the fact that I was using back then, a motion picture camera and then a video camera meant that my ability to communicate those ideas wasn't, look at this chart. 11% of people are doing this, and this is the change that we might be able to make, and the 11% might go down and whatever. I could go, let's look at the videotape, or let's look at the film clip, and you could see the idea or the concept go off in people's heads. So one of my first clients was Citibank, looking at the first installation of ATMs, and it was fun. And after that, it was just one led to another, led to another, led to another, led to another. And by the time the late 80s happened, I was working with a major cross-section of retailers across the US, and then started building other tools. And over the next 30 years, we expanded to 10 offices across the world. We went from looking at physical retail to being able to look at digital retail and digital websites, because, again, one of the issues in the digital world is that data is collected often based on clickstream. Mm-hmm. And that is what people are doing. But one of the things that I know, having worked in retail, but having worked in environmental psychology, is knowing what people are doing is really great. But part of what you're looking for is, what are they not doing that you'd like them to do? Okay. And that became a very, very positive and powerful tool. One of the things that I loved about escaping academia is that nobody was asking me, oh, what's your sample size? I was able to come back and with, whether my sample was 20 people or 100 people or 500 people, if I could come back with some tangible evidence and a direct suggestion on what people could do, the world of business would take it. If I had my Microsoft client here, they would tell you that they got more from looking at 30 web-alongs, okay, as opposed to the clickstream data from 30,000 people. And the digital design community loved it because we could come back and go, let's adjust this website and change these words. This picture isn't working. Let's get something else that fits this example, because this is the difference between a first-time visitor and somebody who's been there hundreds of times, if not thousands. So it was fun.
Are you able to tell that in, like, for example, like a first-time visitor in a retail store, then you're observing them. Is there any way you can identify a repeat visitor versus that, because they might have different behavior?
Oh yeah. It's very easy. You can stand at a doorway as somebody comes into a store and make a series of very accurate judgment calls. Are they familiar with the store? Do they know where they're going? How loud is the clock ticking inside their heads? Okay.
What does that mean?
Well, part of what we're looking at is that historically, through the 20th century, we design stores to hold people as long as we possibly can. Why is it when you walk into Loblaws or Kroger or Stop and Shop that milk is the farthest thing away from the front door? Okay.
It's annoying.
And part of what we know, particularly in a post-pan world, is that people are multitasking. And they're walking into a store, and you can tell when somebody says, "Oh man, I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to relax. I'm going to go look at stuff, whatever. It's part entertainment." Versus somebody who's walking in the door and says, "I need to get in and out of this place as rapidly as I can because I've got a podcast to do with my Canadian friends at 4 o'clock today."
And is there a difference between men and women in that? Because with your book, like What Women Want, guys are they
Yes.
more on a mission, and women are like happy to browse? And
Okay.
sort of...
All right. Let me
step
back.
But...
Let me step back and go. There are one of the things that has been interesting over a 40-year career of doing this is what are the biological constants? What are the things that have stayed the same over 40 years? 90% of us are right-handed. I may be 6'5", my wife may be 5'3", but the basic ratios between hand and mouth and hand and shelf and hand and foot are within the same parameters. We know that our eyes age in the same way, and that eye aging is the same today as it was in 1975, but it's also the same in Seoul as it is in Calgary, as it is in Rio de Janeiro, as it is in New York. So those are the things that stay the same. But there are 6 things that we know are changing. First is that thanks to screens, the connection between our eyes and our brains is shifting. And that part of what that's meant is that there is no more hard line between the physical and the cyber world. So you can walk into a store, a bank, an airport, and a remarkable number of people are staring into their phones. Okay? And that, therefore, understanding some of those issues in terms of what those changes are and the evolution of those changes is very important. Second is the role of gender. Okay? When I stepped off into the world of market research, 40 years ago, the primary difference was between men and women. Okay? And while that still is a very seminal difference, part of what we've watched over the past 40 years is some very important changes in the relationships between genders. Meaning that historically we sold women apparel, food, and beauty. Today, if I walk into a telecom, okay, or I walk into a technology store, some of the most important customers are female because not only are they buying for themselves, they're buying for their children, they're also buying often for their mothers, fathers, and whatever. Whereas you, when you walk in the door, are tending to buy only for yourself. Birth control, I don't mean to make a moral judgment, has been made a fundamental shift in terms of who we are and what we are. And we can see the ramifications of it, across the media, in retail, in politics, in whatever. And that's just important. Third one is generational, which is I'm a baby boomer, but there's some fundamental issues between how I consume at my age and how my daughters consume at their age. I have a 22 and a 26-year-old. And, their priorities, the way they manage their money, even the way they live is distinctly different. And my girls both spent multiple years in group homes where there was a little refrigerator in their bedroom where they kept their things. And there was a refrigerator in the kitchen where they kept the common things. I mean, is that something that's present in your and my life? The answer is absolutely not. But this is, again, part of that evolution. So eyes, gender, generation. Next one is time. and this was something that we talked about, which is that all of us are in the process of trying to manage time. And whether it's managing time as we go online, or managing time as we go in store, or managing time as we do an exercise like this. Fifth one here is what is global and what's local. Meaning that the way someone shops in Bedeck, and the way someone shops in Windsor, and the way someone shops in Toronto have some very distinct differences. And it isn't that there's an infinite series of buckets, but there are some very important buckets that we need to respond to. If I think about it, Vancouver and Toronto are the most ethnically diverse middle-class cities on earth. And whether it's a halal meat section in the Walmart store or it's whatever, those are all things that are critical that maybe don't mean the same thing in Nova Scotia or in, anyway. So what is global and what is local? And then the final one is we passed over a very important moment in the late 1990s, where up until that moment, the overwhelming majority of global wealth was in the hands of an aristocracy, people who knew what they were buying. Today, the overwhelming majority of wealth is in the hands of people who earned it in the course of their own lifetimes. And whether we're talking about Jack Ma, or whether we're talking about Mukesh Ambani, or we're talking about Mr. Musk here, there's some fundamental issues there in terms of particularly consumption. We have, technology billionaires that are cruising around in $250 million yachts who are still buying their clothes out of the Land's End catalog. Okay? And this is, again, part of what we're looking at is part of the challenge in terms of us, in terms of various segments, is that often that we have to provide an education before we generate a sale. And this is, again, one of the poignancies of our consuming culture, which is that it's time for us to be able to react to changes in our climate, changes in terms of our consumption patterns, the fact that recycling is failing, and it is time for us to pay attention. I am reminded that it was global change that killed off the dinosaurs. And sometimes I look up and go, is our higher power up there deciding maybe, humans' time on Earth should come to a close, and I'm going to put in a little climate change issues here, and maybe in 1,000 years I can try something else. That's a joke. Laugh at that, please.
I am laughing. Just to hear everything you're saying. So it's like you think the climate change, like the things that are I think the younger generation has a different awareness of these things, and they're wanting to buy things based on values. I did a great interview with David Allison, who's got the value graphics research that he's done, and saying that people buy based on values. And the younger generation, they're looking for the product to do more than just what I'm buying it for, like product features, that it's actually doing something, or they're making sure the plan is taken care of. Where, I'm a Generation X, probably not as much as maybe their generation. And it's a generational shift that's going on. I'm curious if in your book you're talking about a little bit dark clouds with the way that we consume and the desire for more sustainable thinking, which I love. What after doing the research of your book, like where do you land on the trajectory? Are we going in the wrong direction, or is there a hopeful outcome, or are we in an impasse?
Okay.
Like, where are we at?
About 6 months ago, I and one of my buddies launched a new company. It's called KP Ecological, all one word, all small caps, www.kpecological.com. And we trolled across the world and found a Swedish bioengineering firm that had come up with a way of using plant proteins to make shopping bags, containers, cups, glasses, and even shoe boxes. And we are now knocking on doors of merchants across the country or across North America now, going, wouldn't you like to have something where this bag, if it's put in a compost heap, 120 days later, it's dirt, okay? Rather than a plastic bag that is going to last hundreds of years. And they go, well, it doesn't cost more money. And I'm going, no, it's actually very economical, because if you calculate both the cost of the bag and the cost of recycling, whatever it is, and look at that as a whole, being able to have a compostable container, bag, packaging, maybe a little more money up front, but over the lifespan of what you have to pay for it, it's actually very, very comparable. And, if you think about the value of an eggshell or the strength of an eggshell, we can design a bag, a shopping bag that you can use for a year. Okay, we can design a shoe box, which is, if you want to keep it in your office and store your tax stuff in it, you can do it here. But if you want to throw it away, you don't have to take it to the garbage heap. You just put it in your compost heap, and it's gone. Mm-hmm. So part of what we're trying to do now at this stage in my career is do things that are good for us.
Love it.
And if we can make a little money in that process, that's fine. I'm happy to make a little money, but I'm more happy to be able to give people real choices, and choices that they can feel good about, and choices that, in terms of the larger context of marketing, something that I've read about for you, it's a great story. Mm-hmm. If you were Nike and said, from here on out, our consumption of cardboard is going to be dropped by 35% because we're doing this, don't you think that's something that would resonate with consumers? Don't you think that's something that would be picked up in the press? I think so.
I think initially, for sure, it's like a differentiator. Over time, I think that buyer behavior is leaning in that direction anyways. It's becoming the norm for sure. And I love that this sounds like a legacy project for you. I mean, my whole book is written around how to create a growth loop for businesses that are trying to do good in the world. And they actually have I believe that your model you're describing has a built-in marketing loop where people want to be participating and promoting. They would have no other reason to promote your company other than price in the old models of producing plastic, where now it's a story, like you said. It's something that is meaningful. People want, I believe that there's deep down, humans want to actually make this world a better place, but we just don't make it easy for us. That's all.
I think so too. I mean, this has been, one of the precepts here. There's a word in Hebrew called mitzvah, which is, doing good deeds that often don't have a direct use to you, but make you feel good and are good for the broader world. And, I have spent almost 40 years of my life being a volunteer in New York City about homelessness issues. And, at 6'4", 195 pounds, I can go out on the street and talk to homeless and be able to ask them questions and direct them places. And they will, a third of them will look at me and not want to deal with me. A third of them are sometimes hostile, and a third of them are really grateful for it. Do I get anything for that? The only thing that I get is personal satisfaction.
Yeah, it's like planting a tree, and you won't be able to lean in the shade of it, right? Like that's
true.
Really, it's legacy, right? It's like, and that's part of fulfillment. Like Tony Robbins talks about, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure.
Yep,
and that's what you're doing. You're creating fulfillment. I love that. I mean, I think this is where a lot of businesses, at least the businesses that I'm focusing on, I'm shifting away from working with just large businesses that just want to sell more stuff. I'm looking for businesses that want to make a difference in the world and make the world a better place. And what are the strategies to be able to do that? That's what your work is so interesting, because you're studying this human behavior, and it sounds like you're discovering how humans are consuming, how they're like, specifically in the grocery stores, which I was reading some of the excerpts from your book. It's how are people actually looking to choose to buy. You were saying, I think there was a comment you made about, we've conditioned ourselves to now, and I remember back in the old days, I only got mandarin oranges in the Christmas time, but now I can get them year round. And I'm like, so, it's like, are we, because of the global trade, are we actually making worse on the planet because we have these expectations? Or is it just more amazing because there's more agriculture year-round access? Or what's your take on that
Okay.
bigger framework? Because I was just curious. I didn't quite get a sense of that.
Well, I think part of what is interesting is if we look at a French peasant of the 19th century and we look at the number of things that he or she ate over the course of a year, it's between 60 and 80 different things. Whereas if I took a look at a person living in North America, once you get past 20, it's a little tough, okay? One of the things a lot of people don't realize is if you walk in to a Loblaws in January, where are the freshest blueberries? Are they in the produce section? The answer is no. They're in the freezer section, and they're cheaper because somebody picked them and froze them. And one of the things that is very interesting is that it isn't that we're stepping away from technology. It is that we need to be able to do a better job of using it and understanding it and being able to focus on how to make things better. We know also that the 20th century was about companies getting huge. And I think one of the things that is really exciting about the difference between technology in the 20th century that gave us, Apple, gave us General Mills, gave us General Foods, gave us General Motors. In the 21st century, we're often able to use technology to be able to get better locally. Okay? And one of the things that I'm trying to deal with in how we eat is there a better way for us to consume locally? And recognizing that it isn't just the price that we're paying for it, it is the cost to us in terms of our earth, but it is also the impact on our health. Do you know, in writing this book, I tried to take my own advice. I lost 25 pounds. My blood pressure went down. My cholesterol count went down. Every way in which you measure health, I'm healthier at 71 than I was at age 60. Okay? And I think that's one of the ways in which we not only help ourselves, but we help the world.
So in this eating healthy, we're talking about like the eating locally. Sometimes I don't have a choice. Like it's pretty much whatever's presented to me in terms of like what's local, right? So, and then also I would just want to tackle. I'm happy to hear what your answer is also some restaurants. What I love is that farm to fork, where they actually have a relationship with the local farm and stuff, and I find that that's a unique value proposition, which I really love, because I'm like, it romances it. It's like down the street and it feels really fresh. What sort of when you say make that statement, like if I don't, how do I have control over getting more local food outside of me trying to drive and go to the market, a farmer's market? How can I affect that, or how can I be more aware of that?
Well, there are a number of ways based on where it is that you live. Okay, where it is that you live. If you live in a city, often there are these fantastic hydroponic gardens that you can put in your kitchen. Okay, where you can grow your greens. And do you know who are the origins of that hydroponic technology, organic. We're the pot growers in British Columbia. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we have a hydroponic tree in our house in Connecticut, where we grow a significant amount of the greens that we consume every day. There are ways of being able to do something like that, which is to grow it yourself. The little gardens here are ones that you can put into your apartment in Toronto, and they won't give you everything, but they will give you something that you have every day.
Have you seen some of those? Like they have some that are actually like their services, and they actually are like living fridges of like that you can actually install in subscription and stuff like that. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I have. One of the issues I thought was very interesting is that I was part of a crew that convinced a regional chain in the U.S. to put hydroponic gardens into their parking lot and on their roofs. And the irony is that they were able to produce more than they can sell.
Huh. Interesting.
Okay. Okay. And some of it is, how many of us are trained to take leafy vegetables and find a way to eat them at breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I can take those leafy vegetables and mix them in with my yogurt and my almonds and whatever, it's a terrific breakfast. So some of it is not only doing it, but being able to make some changes. I cut down on my red meat. I eat a lot more fish. When I go to the grocery store, I want wild caught. There are a number of criteria that I process here, and my actual protein bill has declined.
So, in the book, you talked a little bit about the grocery store that we're buying differently. We actually are our experience. You talked about we're buying with a phone. Are people looking at calories? Are you noticing like are people actually? What are the trends of how people are shopping for food? That's really different than it has been in your whole 40 years of doing this.
Okay. I think one of the things that is interesting here is that historically the dominant buyer of grocery were women. Okay. And they still are the dominant one. But the percentage of clueless men on the floor who are doing some of the grocery shopping. Do you know one of the very interesting issues, going back to issue number 2 about gender, is that the number of households in North America where the woman is the dominant bread earner goes up with each passing month. And one of the things I find very interesting in the North American grocery store is the number of clueless guys who are there, often, going, what kind of laundry soap did you say you wanted?
Totally. I'm totally guilty of that. Or I'll go on FaceTime and go, is that what you're talking about?
I mean, and then this is again part of what that process is. And is there a way for the grocery store to be able to better inform or better educate? I looked at a new grocery concept here in the U.S., which is on the USA Today website. And they take vegetables, for example, and they combine them with, here's the cheese that goes with Brussels sprouts. You walk in the door and there's a fixture that is a protein, a starch, and a vegetable where you can assemble dinner all right there. I can remember going into Walmart Canada and there was a fixture in the produce section going, here is your kid's lunchbox needs. But I think part of what we're looking for is a better sense of solution selling. And the fact that the grocery store, as we know it, was basically designed in the 1930s, and it's time to throw that model out.
Yeah, because you're saying like go to the back to get the milk. I kind of think of it a little bit like some of the grocery stores. Reminds me of being in Vegas at a casino trying to find the exit. It's like, and I don't know if that's a design, intentional. I'm sure it is an intentional design. But if I think of like Joe Pine talks about time well spent versus time saved, And I'm curious in your research, like at what point is there a push and pull where you're looking
Okay.
at, say, in a grocery store where, hey, I actually you want people to spend a little more time versus let's get to it and find what I'm looking for.
Okay. So time comes in three forms. Time comes in real time, perceived time, and some combination of the both. Okay. And part of what is very interesting about retail design and about web design is that you have to take both of those real and perceived times and put them into context. Okay? And that's again one of the ways to be able to look at how people are interacting with both physical and cyberspace.
So can you describe a little more? What's the like? How do you actually identify what's perceived? Like, give us a little more. Like, how does it work in terms of the strategy? How do you deploy and what
Well,
do you
I
deploy to
mean,
make a difference?
for example, perceived time is often affected by how lost people are. Okay.
Hmm.
We worked on the design of a Staples store. This is a number of years ago, and we got to what I thought was a very brilliant solution, which was what we called an arena design, meaning that as you came in, fixtures were low, and as you got closer to the wall, the fixtures got higher and higher. And part of what that meant is that the number of people who were walking down an aisle who weren't doing shopping declined. So part of what we're looking at is the lost time in store was reduced. And that's about perceived time. It means that the quality of time that someone is spending, is based on real. If you go to a typical big box store, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, about 20% of the people inside that store are lost. And one of the things that's very interesting here is men are much more willing to look up. Okay. Okay. Because when you look up, you lose control of your body bubble. Okay. Whereas women are much more cognizant of the control of their physical space. And I can walk into a store and be able to ascertain what was the gender of person installing signage.
Interesting. And is
Because
that because? Yeah.
the higher the sign, the more likely it is to be a male. The lower the sign, the more likely it is to be female. And part of what we're looking at is that if we want people to interact with signage, being able to have a strategy in terms of placement is part of what affects both perceived time and real time inside the store.
Does that have to do with like personal safety, like for women's
Yes.
sort of natural instinct for being making sure they're safe?
Well,
Yeah.
there's a term that I coined very early in my career, which will probably go on my tombstone, much to my regret, but still, it's called butt brush factor.
Oh, okay. What's that?
This is the premise that the more likely we are to be brushed from the rear, the less likely we are to convert from a browser to a buyer. And this is true for men and women, but it's particularly true for women. And therefore, whether we're talking about a cosmetic counter or the physical design of the store, the more likely her personal space is to be invaded, the more likely she is to move on and to not make the purchase to use.
It's true because I go into sometimes I'll go, oh, I'm going to go down that. Oh, there's a bunch of people on that. I'm just going to go down this one's empty. I'll go that first. I don't even. I just think about it. I just go, yeah, I don't want to. Don't have to like. Excuse me, walk
Well, I
by.
mean, this is one of the things that was very interesting. Again, as I stepped off into the world of commercial research, is in the late 1970s, early 80s, the almost all research was done based on interviews. It was based on the research techniques developed in media, which is asking people questions. And one of the things that I knew as a behavioral psychologist is what people say they do and what they actually do are often different. And understanding what some of those differences are often where you get the easy solution or a definition of what the tactical problem is.
And you described that, I think, when you were talking about, I think I remember what it was. It was something either I read or I watched something from you, but it was about, sorry, it's all like one big, mesh of your whole body work, but it's like the decompression zones. You're talking about how, like people just run into the store and they think that first, area is like designing it, and you would go from afar and kind of go in and really get an understanding of that. If you ask people, they're not going to give you, but when they walk through the store, that gives you all the evidence you need about how they're moving through. Do you want to describe that a little bit? Because I think,
okay, all right.
I'm sorry, I've kind of covered a lot of ground there. Yeah.
Two things here. If you think about the doorway to a store, as somebody goes from the outside to the inside, there are three things that are happening. They're adjusting their walking speed, they're adjusting their peripheral vision, and they're adjusting to changing light. And therefore, the decompression zone defines how long it takes someone to go from the outside to the inside. And it can be. There are a number of ways of taking that decompression zone and making it shorter. So rather than having it be 10 steps, have it be 4. Okay? There's a line which I use often, and this is, I think, one of the issues in modern business, is that if you walk in to an office building or you walk in to a store and you find the desk farthest away from the front door, that's where the person in charge sits.
Repeat that again. It's like they'll go to the furthest desk?
Well, wait, hold on. It means that when you walk into an office building and you find the desk farthest away from the front door, that's often where the CEO sits.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay.
The same thing is true if talking about a store manager. And one of the things I love doing is doing store clinics, where I take a senior management group and we start in the parking lot and we start talking about all of the different things. I call it thinking standing up.
Okay.
I am reminded of one of the lines that my Israeli colleagues talked about in terms of the Israeli Defense Forces, which is that battles are won when generals get to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the key aspects to both physical and digital management is making sure that people are getting out on the floor and getting out in the parking lot and looking at the doorway and being able to see what happens. And I think that's a valuable education. I recommend to my retail clients that senior management make a requirement that at least one weekend a month, that the CEO, the CMO, the CFO spend time on the floor of a store, of one of their properties. And it's a place for them to look at their customers, and it's a place for them to talk to their employees, their frontline employees.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
you're good.
Yeah, it's just a good education. It's about thinking standing up as opposed to thinking sitting down.
But some of the work that you've done, like if you were to give, like, deploy somebody and they're gonna get insights, but hiring you is like you have a totally different eye of looking and discerning eye of like what you're looking for, like the speed of someone's walking in, the decompression zone. As I remember reading in Why We Buy, was there's a lot of wasted real estate right in the retail store right in front, and they blow past it and stuff. Like there's there's strategies that you have. Like what are some of these strategies that you're like, most people would never even think of this? I think it really highlights the importance and the value of like thinking very differently about people moving through these retail environments.
Well, I think part of what we're looking at is what I call the meeting of art and science. Okay. And this is one of the things I think about retail design or about architecture, is that we need to factor some science and ergonometrics and whatever into that process. I mean, there are simple things about a doorway. If you can change the texture under people's feet from what they feel under their feet on the outside to what they step on the outside. Part of what it means is that they slow down faster.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there are a series of, very seminal, sometimes painfully simple steps that we can do that make a discernible difference.
There was one thing I saw that was really cool. I can't remember where I found. I saved it, and it showed a shopping basket, and one was red, and the other one was black, and the sign said red. Feel free to talk to me, and the black was I'm shopping and don't disturb me. So if you're carrying it, and I wondered if you ever come across anything like that, or
Oh yeah. I think this is um, not only is it about whether the shopping basket is, but there was a Texas supermarket that used to have singles night on Thursdays, which I
oh,
thought was,
interesting.
they would change the music, they would do whatever, they'd put out some beverages, but they would be flooded with single men and single women because you could talk to people on the floor of the grocery store. And it was a way of getting to know people in a place that was eminently safer and in a way much more real than a bar room or a disco.
Interesting. See, that's the kind of stuff that I think is missing in a lot of retail. Is retail is so focused on transactional, moving you through quickly, and but a lot of times I don't want to hang out much in a store, and that's time well spent. But it would be, I mean, what in your experience of looking at helping people redesign or rethink their spaces, what have you seen, or what's some of the most interesting things you've seen in terms of compelling people that don't want to leave a store? Is that even a possibility?
Okay. Well, here is just one very, very simple thing is that it is in most grocery, drug, and fashion. There's a very predictable demographic shift based on time of day and day of the week. If you look at a Loblaws, the who is in the store at 11 o'clock on a Monday versus 3 o'clock on a Tuesday versus 9 o'clock on a Thursday is predictably different. Why aren't we changing the music to be able to match the demographics of who's in the store?
I literally was just talking to a veterinarian clinic about that as a strategy of changing music for the time of day. 100%. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean it's just and if I'm hearing music that I like and I respond to, am I more likely to stay? The answer is yes. Am I more likely to buy more? The answer is yes.
hmm yeah, it's using all the stimulus that you have available to you. So, what are some of the ones you've gone? This is super interesting. You've probably never heard of this.
Well, I mean, there are things, how do I use all five senses?
hmm
For example, again, in grocery, we know that handing out samples gets people's saliva glands working. And it isn't that they're going to buy what you have them sample, but if your saliva glands are working, part of the irony is you generally end up purchasing more.
Oh, interesting. Never thought of that. I never thought of that. I see that at Costco they have like the sampling. I'm sure I figured it works because they do it all the time, but never thought it from that perspective at all. What about smell? It's I think of perfume store. It's pretty obvious that that's got smell, but there used to I'm thinking about like at a grocery store because this is the body work has been around supermarkets. Is there certain smells that actually activate more purchasing or it can change behavior? And you have different smells in different areas.
Well, the issue is how do you manage it? Okay,
Right.
how do you manage it? Okay, and the issue is smell can be positive, it can be negative, and it sometimes can be neutral. And based on time of day, the nature of the store, all of those things are things that you can control.
Yeah. How do you decide what one person loves something another person doesn't? Like, do you go to the majority? Like, how do you consult to somebody on deciding factors, like when the part of the bell curve is actually disdains it, for example?
Well, I think this is something that is often discerned locally as opposed to globally.
hmm
Okay, and you know um, the smell of kimchi. you know what kimchi is?
Oh
The
yeah, yeah,
Korean
yeah. Korean
pickled
cabbage.
vegetables.
Yeah.
In certain markets may be very powerful, and in other markets is completely repugnant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That makes a ton of sense. So when we talk about the decompression zone, back to that, I was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, is there such a thing as a decompression zone on digital?
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, of course.
Tell me about it. What would be that?
Well, the question is, you have the difference between a novice and an experienced user. And for the novice being able to take the logical steps to be able to get to where they want to go versus the experienced person who goes, man, don't give me the screen. I know where I want to go. How come it takes 4 clicks rather than 2 or 10 clicks rather than 2?
So, because the decompression isn't it supposed to slow you down to kind of let you kind of like immerse yourself versus just trying to blow
Well,
through?
this is again that question that we talked about time.
Yeah,
That there, and that time in a 2020 23, you know, I can I could look at somebody walking in the door and be able to make a very accurate judgment of how loud the clock is ticking inside their heads.
interesting. What about packaging? Packaging, like you did you delve in that at all? Because the
Oh, of
environment is
course,
part of it. So,
of
what's some
course.
of the packaging that you're seeing that's shifting outside of the like when you mentioned at the very beginning, the eco-friendly, but like in terms of packaging, I mean, I've seen a shift because I used to do a lot of package design in marketing with my agency, and the desire was more show the product as opposed to hide the product. And I don't know what's sort of
Okay.
your take on the trends now.
Okay. All right. This is again gets back to that eco issue. Once we reach age 40, 80% of our weekly purchases are the same thing. You have decided that you like gray poupon mustard rather than Gulden's.
It's
Why do you have to
true.
keep buying it in the same container that screams at you? Shouldn't there be a way of being able to make a better connection between the store and the storage in your home or the storage in your refrigerator? And that if you've made your commitment to Grey Poupon, can I it doesn't mean that I have to sign up for a subscription, but there could be a way of being able to say, I'm going to get it in a compostable bag that I put in a container that I already own, which says Grey Poupon, but fits exactly into my refrigerator, so I maximize the space. And this is, again, one of those topics that I think is very interesting is
Mm.
how do we do a better job of coordinating packaging in the store with packaging as we use it, store it, interact with it in the context of our consuming environment.
Very interesting. I could totally see how somebody could have a really cool like storage visual, thing in your fridge, and then you just have to do refills or whatever. You see that with like other products that are system products. Like I think of my wife's likes the coffee that's got the little containers. It's like nice and contained. Um, what about COVID? Because COVID kind of probably changed how people re-entered back into stores. Or I think about even my own person thing. I never would order groceries. Now I order some groceries, and then now we kind of don't because I like picking my own meat. I don't like what they pick for me. Like I'm realizing my own buying decisions are changing and they're kind of evolving. How much has that affected sort of buyer behavior in store and out?
Well, this is part of what we're looking for is the hybrid shopping trip, where you walk into the store and you buy the meat, you buy the vegetables, and you buy the stuff, wine or the thing for a special occasion, and then you have made your order, and as you go to checkout, you go, here I am, I'm